Today, we are going to discuss about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism are actions morally permissible if and only they produces more happiness other than available actions. The aspect of utilitarianism can look very hard to resist, but we can break utilitarian thesis up into two parts, namely, the theory of what is valuable and the theory of right action. Given what is valuable, the valuable theory plus right action theory. The valuable theory, the only thing what is valuable is in its own right is happiness. In the absence of suffering, other things like money might be derivatively valuable. Why? Because it helped to get happiness. While the right action theory, the one that maximizes, produces the most of what valuable or that uncertain or that produces the most of what expected value. If you put the two pieces, the theory of what is valuable and the theory of right actions together, given what is valuable, you can get utilitarianism. Here is the very simple example.
Let's say I'm a doctor. I have only 5 dosage left of some very scarce medicine. In an emergency situation, I'm left with 6 patients, all of whom need a drug to survive. But one of them, let's call her needy, will survive only if I can give her all 5 dosage of the drug. The other 5 patients can survive on a single dosage each, and we can assume that I know nothing else about these patients. Utilitarianism will tell us to divide up the drug, saving the 5 and allowing needy to die. Why? Because saving the 5 life preserves much more happiness and prevents much more suffering in saving just one life. In that case, that seems the right answer.
Bentham's utilitarianism. Bentham, its founder, devotes much of his work to violent attacks upon the whole natural law conception. But if he is impatient with the vagueness and the inconsistencies of the natural law theories, if utilitarianism represents one of the periodical movements from the abstract to the concrete, from the idealistic to the materialistic, from the a priori to the empirical, this movement at the same time expresses aims particularly characteristics of the 19th century. Bentham is an individualist and an egalitarian. For him, there is no myth for an organic community. An individual is an end in himself. The aim of law is the creation of conditions which make possible the maximum freedom of each individual so that he may pursue what is good for him. The law must serve totality of the individuals in a community. Ultimate end of legislation for him is the greatest happiness of the greatest number, which results to subordination of individual right to community needs. Due to Bentham's criticization, the shift from original insistence of natural rights to paramount of social happiness is to a considerable extent. The proper proportion between offense and punishment, between merit and reward and classification of criminal offenses. Bentham believed that an individual other than legislators is the best agent to produce maximum happiness of all. He believed that if everyone looked for himself, the general good, that is, the happiness of the greatest number, would be secured. Bentham is the most active and successful social reformer. Bentham devoted his life to numerous inequalities which hampered the rising of English democracy, survivals from the age of feudalism and landed gentry. Bentham is not a great philosopher, but a great jurist and an even greater social reformer.
In 1789, he was an early defender of economic liberalization, freedom of expression, the separation of church and state, women's rights, animal rights, the right to divorce, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of capital punishment, the abolition of corporal punishment, prison reform, and the criminalization of homosexual acts.
According to Bentham, law is the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain. In other words, he saw law as a balance of interest. Example, punishment of homosexualities. The difficulties in tracing and accurately defining this offense as well as the relatively small harm done to society by non-punishment outweigh the interest of the community in punishment. Other example, reform of poor law. Bentham balances the interests of a free individualistic economy against the interests of society in usefully occupying the paupers in individualistic production. We now go to John Stuart Mill, a student of Bentham. Bentham believed that there was no conflict between individual and a plural utility, in unconvincing why an individual should restrain his untethered pursuit of happiness in the interest of the other members of the community. An admission that there are higher and lower value in social life and lower has to yield to the higher. John Stuart Mill attempts a synthesis between justice and utility. It means, in essence, the individual feeling of right, which would in itself lead the individual to resent and desire retaliation for anything for disagreeable to him, tempered and moralized by the sound feeling. The association between the individual and the general good leads Mill to a theory of punishment not different from Hegel's. In thinking of the general interest, the criminal himself is led to consider his crime as an evil. For Hegel, punishment is the negotiation of the crime and thus expresses the national will of the criminal himself. The utilitarian will of the metaphysician Hegel reached amazingly similar conclusions in eliminating the dualism between individual and social interests of sublimating the individual's will and his sentiment for justice. Mill's approach of this differs very much from that of his master Bentham. The emphasis shifts from the individual to the general interest, and it is in reality duty rather than right or self-seeking interest or pleasure which underlies Mill's conception of law. Rudolf von Ihering and the foundation of sociological jurisprudence. Ihering's utilitarianism in many ways a distinct advance from English utilitarianism. Ihering's system developed aspects of Austinian positivism and combines them with principles of utilitarianism as established by Bentham and developed by Mill. Ihering became strongly aware of paramount necessity for law to serve social purpose. Thus, Ihering became a utilitarian. The philosophical basis of Ihering's utilitarianism is the recognition of purpose as the universal principle of the world, embracing inanimate and animate creation. The opposition between causality and volition. The purpose of human volition is not the act itself, but the satisfaction derived from it. Example, the debtor pays his debt in order to free himself from it. The purpose of the law for Ihering is the protection of interest, and in the definition of interest, he follows Bentham, describing it as the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. But individual interest is made part of a social purpose by connecting one's own purpose with other people's interests. By converging interests for the same purpose, cooperation is both about commerce, society, and the state results from this. Ihering has here arrived at a problem which faces every legal philosopher, whether reconciliation between individual and collective interest is possible and how it can be brought about. Ihering finds the answer by means of the principle of levers of social motion. In these levers, he combines egoistic and altruistic. Egoistic levers are reward and coercion. Desire for reward produces commerce, and threat of coercion makes law and state possible. Altruistic or moral levers of social motion are feelings of duty and love. The four combines to make society possible, and the object of society is to secure the satisfaction of human wants. The totality of these wants, Ihering divides into three categories. 1. Extra-legal, offered to man by nature with or without effort on his part. Example, producing soil. Second, Mixed legal. Conditions of life exclusive to man. Example, preservation of life, reproduction of life, labor and trade. Mixed legal is independent of legal coercion. Number 3, contradistinction. This depends entirely on legal command. Example, the command to pay debts or taxes. On the other hand, no legislation is needed for such matter as eating and drinking or the reproduction of the species. The realization of social purpose, the conditions of social existence may be pursued by morality, ethics, or law. The characteristic approach of law is by means of the power of the state, which exercises external coercion. Contents of law must be infinitely various. Law must adapt its regulations to the varying conditions of people, according to the degree of civilization and the needs of time. Thus, e-hearing is bound to oppose the idea of natural law as giving certain permanent and universally valid contents of law. The idea of law must always be the same is no better than that medical treatment should be the same for all patients. But if the law is coercion, how can it coincide with the pursuit of individual interest? Law never secures the good of the individual as an end in itself, but only as a means to the end of securing the good of society. Example, the right to reparation in the case of a wrongful injury. Another, about property. The law on property exists not solely for the owners, it also exists for the society. The law must try to reconcile the interests of the two. Thus, this leads e-hearing to justify expropriation of legal restriction imposed upon the exercise of individual property regimes. Expropriation solves the problem of harmonizing the interests of society with those of the owner. With e-hearing, utilitarianism is the pursuit of individual pleasure and become the balance between individual and communal interests. Through the idea of balance as the purpose of law, e-hearing became the father of modern sociological jurisprudence. This insistence on coercion as characteristics of law and making the power of the state as the instrument of the law, e-hearing created the essential foundations of modern jurisprudence, suitable to practical lawyers, because it was much closer contact with social realities in the 19th and 20th century. But the eternal problem of conflict between individual and collective interests, e-hearing has not been able to prove any more than other logical philosophers.
The history of the utilitarianism has been discussed by my classmate. We are now in the new legal idealism. When we're talking about the new legal idealism, it is the modern sociological idealism are all lawyers who, from systematic study on the practical administration of any particular branch of law, they arrive at certain problems, the solution of which may seek in a legal theory. It is connected with the fact that their theories are concentrated in the problem of balancing conflict of interest. For civil lawyer, concentrated with the solution of conflicting claims and interests between which he seeks to find a just balance. Constitutional or commercial lawyer is apt to see legal problems more directly as an effect of the relations between authority and subject, between community and individual. It is therefore the practical lawyer's philosophy of law for the legislation is of course due to consider the various social interests in a sovereign manner and of direct reference to one political ideal on another. In any conflict between natural and positive law, the lawyer is in principles bound by positive law. Jerry is the first and also one of the most important leader in the fight for new sociological altogether conception of the law does not oppose disobedience and positive law in certain extreme cases. Preferably, be by legitimate means, Jerry thinks that in extreme cases, natural law would legitimate rebellion in absence of superior authority which sanctions the breach. Disobedience to positive law is revolution, and natural law supplies once again this ethical legitimation for such revolution. German interest and jurisprudence. The new movement is based on the realization that the judge cannot satisfactorily deal with the needs of life by mere logical construction. The primacy of logic is replaced by the primacy of an examination and evaluation of life. Intercent jurisprudence, developing the ideas of e-hearing, considers the balancing interests as the paramount task of law and legal science, and is empathetic in including in the interest to be balanced not only by private but also public interests, the satisfaction not only the material needs but also ideal needs. Fundamentally, this movement does not wish to provide the judge or administration with particular solution. It wants to supply him with the necessary material for his decision. Social engineers, Raskopound and his successors. The program and conclusions of American sociological jurisprudence have been most fully elaborated by Raskopound. Pound classifies legally protected interests in the three main categories, such as public interest, social interest, and private interest. 6 paramount interests enumerated. Number 1. The first is the social interest in general security. Second, the security of social institution covers the protection of domestic relations and political and economic institution, long recognized in legal provisions securing the institution of marriage or protecting the family as a social institution. Number 3, social interest in general moral concerns the protection of society against moral descriptions, provisions against corruption, gambling, blasphemy, the invalidity of transactions contrary of good morals, or the provisions regarding the conduct of trustees. Number 4, the social interest in the conservation of social resources is described by Pound as the claim or want or demand involved in social life in civilized society that the goods of the existence shall not be waste, legal protection to abuse of rights. 5. The social interest in general progress, freedom of property, free trade and protection against monopoly, freedom of industry, and the encouragement of invention. Number 6. Lastly, the social interest in the individual human life, legal protection of free speech or freedom of vocation, as well as with changing strength and emphasis in the freedom of industry. Pound himself has inserted the certain evaluation by describing the interest in the individual life as the most important of all. However, Pound himself recognizes the danger of an implicit evaluation in the grading interests as either individual, public, or social. The protection of inventions by exclusive patent, for example, may be an individual interest by personality as well as social interest in economic progress. It is not only the enumeration of interests as much or as such, but also their respective weight, which is a matter of changing political and social philosophies. Pound has also made an attempt to define the man-legal values of civilized society. He himself felt compelled to admit that civilization, our time demands some further propositions. He counts the claim of the job holder to security in his job. Finally, he sees the emergence of a postulate that the risk of misfortune to individuals is to be borne by society as a whole. But many contemporary jurists, philosophers, and politicians who regard Pound's formulation of the legal postulates of our civilization as inadequate. The main and more urgent problem is that of method by which the lawyer can arrive at a balancing and evaluation of such interests. Justice Cardoso attempted to elaborate the problems involved but failed to make major problem of judicial interpretation entirely articulate. We are dealing with the free law jurist. A sociological jurisprudence, in the sense characterized above, was not the only reaction against the predominance of analytical jurisprudence. Let's hear the explanation from Ms. Baud.
Yeah, the free law theories has a definite bend. It discards legal logic is a fiction and an illusion. But it is not content to analyze the legal process as a matter of social reality.
Yes, it has a philosophy and ideology of its own, that of the creative lawyer who, free and untrammelled, paragraph and rec, finds and finds the law in accordance with justice and equity. Ms. Baud?
But they want the judge to alter the law, where the letter of the law would not be in accordance with certain fundamental principles and demands of justice.
Yes. Presently, the new version of Reyes-Rech finding has been presented by George Scon, rejecting the traditional jurisprudence of norms and concepts. The author demands that law should be found in the individual case without any ties of norms and rules.
Yeah, the law can be made without any norm, be it policy of a statute, of precedent, or even of a sense of justice, which must be based on some scale of legal values.
Thank you for watching the discussion about utilitarian perspective. My name is Antonio Gascon Daracan Jr.
And I am Fainshina Pundinlan Baon
under Professor Eugene Ko
at the City University of Pasay.
Pasay. Thank you and God bless.